So thanks everyone for coming. We really appreciate you making your way here today, those of you who came from afar. Despite the road and icy sidewalk conditions, we really appreciate you coming in. We're really pleased with the turnout, so thank you so much for being here today. My name is Terry Mooring, and I'm the first Vice President of the BCTF, and I'm a teacher from Quesnel. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're on the land today, on the joint traditional unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and I just want to acknowledge that. I'll be your MC for this afternoon as we celebrate our 100th anniversary of the founding meeting of the BCTF, and we're really proud of that tradition and that history, so thank you so much for joining us today. Whether you're a current or past staff member, active or retired teacher, or a member of the broader labor movement, we're all very thankful that you could join us. I'd also like to acknowledge our deep appreciation to Donna Colombe and many other staff who worked on today's celebration, along with the Labor Heritage Center. We're really grateful for all the hard work that went into putting this event together. A lot has changed in the last 100 years since January 4th, 1917, but some things haven't. The BC Teachers Federation set out to make working and learning conditions better 100 years ago, and we've built an incredibly strong, influential, and proud union that advocates for public education in our profession even today. So we have a lot to be proud of, and we're so happy that you're here to join us today and being a part of the celebration. So I'd like to first introduce Glenn Hansman, our president of the BC Teachers Federation, and he's going to say a few words. So thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Terry, and I'm not sure if it was as snowy as it is today or icy 100 years ago on January 4th, 1917. But good afternoon to all of you as well. It's really an honor to be here as the president of the BCTF in our 100th anniversary year, and to be here to acknowledge all the work that BC's public school teachers have been doing for a full century on behalf of their colleagues, for children, and for public education in this province. You're going to hear some great storytelling today, a lot of information about accomplishments over the past 10 decades, but I wanted to start by looking ahead. What we are, the BC Teachers Federation, what we're going to do as an organization in the future to honor and build on the legacy of those that have come before us. And the future starts in the belief that we all share that education is a universal right. It's a value held passionately by BC teachers and our colleagues across the globe, and we're very proud to have been a part of that international conversation since almost the beginning of our organization. For that right to education to be upheld in children's lives, they must have access to quality public schools in their own communities and neighborhoods, and we continue to advocate for that as vociferously as possible. The BCTF has fought for and will continue to fight hard to ensure those schools are protected and that public education in this province fosters an engaged citizenry and a socially just democracy. To get there, the BCTF is leading the way in many, many areas. We are working to further equity and inclusion in our union, schools, and communities, to develop a deeper understanding of Aboriginal ways of knowing history and culture, and doing our responsible part in reconciliation. We're also striving to achieve significant increases to public education funding, to gain appropriate resources and time to implement the changes in our curriculum, assessment, and reporting in this province, to ensure that the restored collective agreement language that we just won back, the Supreme Court of Canada, is respected and fully funded and implemented as soon as possible, and of course, to prepare for upcoming rounds of bargaining to ensure future improvements for our members, their students, and public education in this province. It's a big agenda, but if we've learned anything from the past 100 years, it's that BC teachers and our union are up to the task. We're passionate, we're strong, we're organized, we work closely with our allies in the labor movement, parents, friends, and other organizations across British Columbia, across Canada and globally. And we care because our students and the communities and the issues that we fight for are worth every part of the effort. So thanks so much for being here today. Thank you to everyone involved in planning today's event and all the other 100th anniversary events throughout the past year. And it's an honor to be standing in front of so many people who've contributed so much, both themselves and their families over the past decades.
Okay, next I'd like to introduce another Vancouver teacher, Irene Lanzinger. Irene is the president of the BC Federation of Labor, and she is the first woman to hold this position. So we are very proud of Irene. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry, and it's my great pleasure to be here and bring you the greetings and solidarity of the 500,000 members of the BC Federation of Labor. And there are a number of officers in the room. I was delighted to see them come. Stephanie Smith from the BCGEU and Suzanne and Paul with her. Paul Farrow from the CUPE and Karen Ranalata, who's also an officer. Michelle Laurie, who was a president of local of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers and is now works for the United Steelworkers. I probably missed a few out there, but George Ferguson from upstairs. He only had to come down the elevator, but from the Federation of Post-Secondary Educators and also an officer of the Fed. The BCTF is well loved and respected in the labor movement, and I think it's reflected by the officers who are here today. I want to tell you a story about when I became president of the BCTF. I became president in 2007, and it was 2 years after our illegal strike of 2005. And I followed Ginny Sims. And when I went to the Fed, I followed Jim Sinclair. It is my lot in life to follow, popular, well-known leaders who are, well-known in the media. And so when I got elected, there was a media scrum. And so all these cameras and reporters and someone stuck a microphone in my face and they said, "Are you going to be as much trouble as Ginny Sims?" And I had a lot of temptations at that moment, like "you ain't seen nothing yet," or something like that. But what I did say was something that I had learned by being an activist in the BCTF. And what I said was, the BCTF was founded in 1917, and the first strike of teachers was in 1919. We have always been, as members of the BCTF, passionate advocates for teachers, for public education. It's not about a single person, it's about this organization. And it's about fighting for the things we believe in. I'm not sure I said all of that, but that is the truth of the matter. And that is, the answer to that question, is that we will always be trouble. And the BCTF will always be trouble because we care about what we do. I want to talk about what a strong union the BCTF is and has been for 100 years. And that is so critically important to having an equal and just and democratic society. Unions and the wonderful officers who are here from other unions play this role too. We play a role in making the world a better place, a more democratic place, a more socially just place. And the BCTF, before it was a labor union under the Labor Code, played that role as a union, fighting for salaries, for benefits, for rights, for respect for teachers, and does such a good job of that. But the second thing about the BCTF is the passionate advocacy for public education. And everybody in this room knows how important public education is to that democratic society, to that society that values equality and tries to ensure that every kid gets what they need. And so that passionate advocacy for public education is also such an important part of the history of this organization. And I applaud that on this birthday of the BCTF. And if that weren't enough, fighting for teachers' rights and salaries and benefits, fighting for public education, the BCTF is also an amazing leader in international solidarity and that work around the world. And I have been so fortunate to participate in that when I was a vice president and president of the BCTF, and still occasionally get invited to go along on some of those trips to other countries. So in Latin America, and Central America, South America, and Africa, the BCTF is well known for supporting teachers all around the world, for supporting public education all around the world. And we have both given solidarity to our brothers and sisters and friends in other countries and received that back when we've had our struggles here. The BCTF has recognized that the struggle for social justice is a global struggle. And we will not win that alone as a country, as a province, as a union in this province. We have to join with everybody around the world to do that. So it is my great pleasure to say happy birthday, BCTF. Congratulations on 100 years of wonderful, wonderful work, and we all look forward to 100 more years of that great work. Thank you.
Thanks, Irene. Our next speaker is Moira McKenzie, and Moira is our Executive Director of the BCTF. Previous to that, she worked as the Director of Campaigns and Communications. And of course, Irene was and is a longtime activist in the BCTF and a passionate advocate for public education and social justice. So please welcome Moira.
Just imagine that you could be transported back to January 4th, 1917, to meet the teachers who came together in the King Edward School auditorium at the founding meeting of the AGM, or founding AGM of the BCTF, and to witness firsthand the excitement and pride that those early activists must have felt in creating the Federation. Imagine walking into the meeting in progress and hearing the clause-by-clause debate on the Constitution and the fundamental objectives. Think about the members elected to the executive that day to serve on the very first executive committee member, determined to nurture and grow the organization and dedicated to public education, the teaching profession, and the welfare of teachers. Those members, 8 men, Lister, Little, Charlesworth, Thornburg, Bowles, McNeil, McKee, Cotham, and 3 women, Munn, Lawson, and Parks, were elected that day. But think about being there that day, watching immediately after their election, the AGM assigned them their first big important task, an urgent task. As soon as they were elected, they were told to set about collecting data to equip a delegation of teachers to meet with the Council of Public Instruction on education matters forthwith. And so it began. The BCTF sprang to life and immediately sprang into action. It wasn't an organization to rest on its laurels then, and it's not today. Truly, looking back, we would have well understood if just creating the BCTF had been enough for that day. But nope, there was a purpose to the organizing, points that had to be made and important work to be done, and that's an ethic that has defined the BCTF ever since. Think about all the things you'd want to say to those teachers that came out on this very day in 1917. I bet you one of them is thank you. Thank you for making your vision of the BCTF a reality and for giving birth to this wonderful union. If you could go back in time, I suspect you'd also want to take a moment and thank a certain Mrs. Templar, who at the second AGM in 1918 brought forward a resolution on equal pay for equal work and equal privileges for women members. True, it was postponed to another time. But don't you just love that the BCTF was debating this principle in 1918? And wouldn't you have tripped over yourself to meet this intrepid woman who put that resolution on the floor? If you could flash back to the third AGM, you would see incredible momentum gathering. By 1919, the BCTF already had 22 member organizations, published The Educator and sent it to every teacher in the province, had secured influence and involvement in curriculum, achieved changes in the School Act to provide for arbitration of salary disputes and teacher access to their school inspectors' reports, had developed proposals to put forward on sick leave, salary schedules, tenure, and a teacher bureau under the control of the BCTF, had worked out a superannuation plan they wanted to present to the legislature, had secured an office and support staff, and set about organizing a confederation of teacher organizations of the Western provinces, sharing strategies and materials, which they refer to as propaganda, and action plans. What would you have said if you could have spoken at that 1919 AGM? Would it be congratulations? You really established the character of the BCTF. Your work got the organization off and running. We're inspired by you, and we can promise that we've carried your ambitious plans forward. Let me tempt you to envision one more AGM. It was the 5th one. It was held in 2021. By that meeting, the leadership was reporting on attending the AGM of the Canadian Teachers Federation. The BCTF had been instrumental in founding the CTF, and the Federation's own Henry Charlesworth was its first president, elected the year before in 2020. One delegate to the CTF AGM reported back to the BCTF saying the meeting was intensely gripping and highly satisfactory. Who could ask for more for a teacher union meeting? Now, what was interesting also is part of the arrangements and the commitments and the deals they were making at the CTF was a commitment from the eastern provinces not to undercut the western provinces in salaries. Things have changed. And in fact, salaries did dominate that AGM. The AGM was focused on teacher salaries, poor salaries, salary inequities, salary disputes, and unfair attacks on salaries by school district employers. But the BCTF conclusion of the day was simple. Pay the teachers a fair salary on a transparent scale, recognize experience, recognize qualifications, get rid of arbitrary and discriminatory considerations, and resolve disputes fairly. Direct, apt, and timeless. Now, if you could go back there for a moment to that AGM, what would you say to those teachers and the members and the Federation who pulled together and pulled off some incredible victories in the face of outrageous employer actions in those years? Wouldn't you say thank you for entwining teacher rights, remuneration, and conditions with professional priorities? Wouldn't you say that they really established long, long ago, before BCTF was recognized as a union, that we are a union of professionals? Wouldn't you say, you'll be glad to know it still is, and we've steadily built on your hard-won gains? I've briefly brought you back to just the first 5 years of the BCTF. There are many facets of BCTF history that are worth our admiration and our gratitude. So many stories of courage and inspiration through the years, and so many BCTF members who blazed the trails for us today in professional issues, bargaining, social justice, international solidarity, national and global leadership, Aboriginal education, pensions, health, wellness, safety, political action, and so much more. Now, what if we could bring George Lister, the very first BCTF president, to our gathering here today? We do have his picture on the wall over there. I think we'd be really proud to tell George that the Federation has been an unsinkable union. It's charted many a course, weathered many a storm, and it's always been true to its principles. The BCTF, its members, local leaders, and staff have created an amazing 100-year history together. I think George Lister would congratulate us and thank us right back. And I think he'd say, here's to the 100th anniversary of the BCTF, and here's to the next 100 years of making history. Thank you.
Thank you, Moira. And so up next is another longtime BCTF activist and our former executive director, Ken Nowakowski. Ken recently received the Federation's 2015 G.A. Ferguson Award for Outstanding Service in Public Education. A former president and staff member with the BCTF, Ken's work in labor and education is still ongoing as he works with the Labor Heritage Center. Please welcome Ken.
Thank you, Terry. And Moira, when you were talking about going back to 1917, 100 years, and think about being there, I actually had an incident happen earlier when I got here to the building. I went down to the archive area and ran into our archivist, David Stange, and he said to me, "Well, Ken, what do you remember of that meeting?" And I always thought I looked young for my age, but I said the only thing I could remember is that they were smoking. So as a social studies teacher, I quickly learned the importance of talking about and teaching students about the history of working people as part of the history of our country and our province. Because so many of those students, most of them came from families that were working class families, working people families. And it was an interesting thing to challenge them to understand that it wasn't really just the entrepreneurs and the politicians who built this province and this country. It was working people who built it. And that's an important concept, an important thing to know, and that is the hallmark of the BC Labour Heritage Centre, which I am very pleased to be part of. And I would recognize that there are several members here who are involved in the centre, either on the board or on some of our working groups who are here this afternoon as well. I also, as a BCTF activist for many, many years, I really grew to love this union and to love its multifaceted history. It's just absolutely fascinating. And recently I participated along with my colleague Al Cornez in interviewing a lot of our past presidents about their experiences as presidents during their period of time that they were presidents. And they go back a long ways, I mean, all the way back to the 60s. And you know, before we were even 50 years old, right? So there's a lot of history there, and I thought I knew a lot of BCTF history when I started these interviews. Was I ever wrong? I sure learned a lot from my colleagues who I see every year at the Past President's Dinner about what actually happened during their terms of office. It's absolutely fascinating. But I am here today as the chair of the BC Labour Heritage Centre, and I want to congratulate the BCTF on its 100 years of achievement. And many of you will have seen, and if you haven't seen, you should see the plaque that is at the back of the room. It's a plaque that the BC Labour Heritage Centre has put together with the BCTF to commemorate this important anniversary. Now, the BCTF was actually founded on this day, January 4th, 1917, at King Edward High School, which was at the corner of 12th and Oak. And there's medical facilities on that site today. In fact, the Diamond Center is there. But inside the Diamond Center is a huge picture of King Edward School, as it was in the day. And the plaque that you see at the back is going to be installed in the Diamond Center right next to the picture of King Edward School. So when you read the plaque, it says on this site, it will be on that site. So the first AGM of the BCTF took place there 100 years ago today. And the following associations, and I think this is interesting, were admitted to the BCTF because the BCTF was established as a federation of local associations. And these are the associations that were the initial associations: the Vancouver Teachers Association, the Vancouver Women's Educational Club, South Vancouver Teachers Association, Point Grey Teachers Association, New Westminster Teachers Institute, Victoria Teachers Association, and the Chilliwack Valley Teachers Association. Anyway, it's interesting to note that Point Grey and South Vancouver were actually separate municipalities in 1917. They did not become a part of Vancouver until 1929, so that's why we had 3 Vancouver associations there. But it was the formation of the Federation was a radical departure from, in as much as it was a type of teacher organization entirely new to Canada. It had existed in Britain and in Scotland, but in Canada it was a new kind of organization. It was an organization of the teachers, by the teachers, and for the teachers. And it was unlike the organizations that had preceded it. They were called teacher institutes. And they included superintendents of education and education department officials, usually who ran the institutes. So this was really a big step for teachers to take control of their own and create their own organization. At their founding meeting, as Maria pointed out, George Lister was elected as the president, and they did adopt a constitution. And that constitution included objectives that guide the BCTF to this day, and they are identified on the plaque. But I'm going to read them to you because I can remember when I was president of the BCTF and vice president and an officer, going out to meet with new teachers who were being inducted into the Federation. I don't know whether they still do inductions now, but and whether or not the current officers use these same objectives. But it always felt good to tell them what we were about in 1917 and what we are still about today. To foster and promote the cause of education, to raise the status of the teaching profession in British Columbia, and to promote the welfare of the teachers of BC. 3 very solid objectives. BCTF had voluntary membership. It cost you 50 cents. It's gone up a little since then. And it was open to all teachers, irrespective of gender, religion, or race, which is fairly significant in that time frame. So hopefully once the plaque is installed at the Diamond Center, if you get a chance to be going by that building, you might walk by and take a look at it and see it next to the picture of the school. So I've said a bit about the BC Labour Heritage Centre, and we conceive it to be our role to try and find ways and means of promoting the fact that working people had a major role to play in building this province. And this project, which we call Remembering Working People, Plaques Around the Province, is one way in which we do that. And what we do is we work with local unions, provincial unions, unions generally, community groups, labor councils, whoever is interested. And if they have an idea about something that happened in their community any time in the past that was significant, that involved working people, we will work with them to put together a plaque. We'll get the plaque made at a union shop in Richmond and have it installed. Donna Sakuda, who is here with us, has been marvelous at working with these groups all around the province to get these plaques done, the wording done, the plaques sent out, and then installed, as we are doing today for this one. And it's a real tribute to working people to know that they are being recognized for the role that they have played. But none of this would be possible. I want to recognize 2 groups here at this time. One is the actual funding for the plaques, because they're not cheap. The BC Labour Heritage Centre covers 2/3 of the cost. But the reason we're able to cover that 2/3 of the cost is because we have other organizations who contribute to the cost of the plaques, namely WorkSafe BC, the Bogue Foundation, a particular family foundation, and in the case of teacher plaques, the BC Retired Teachers Association, and we have here the president of the Retired Teachers Association, Patricia Clough, and Barb Michalek, the president of the chair of the Heritage Committee of the BC Retired Teachers Association, who have been working with us on this plaque and 5 other teacher plaques that we hope to install over the next year. So the other group I want to recognize that, again, we couldn't exist without and do the kind of work that we're doing are our sponsoring unions. And I want to identify them. They are the BC Teachers Federation, the BC Government and Service Employees Union, QPBC, the United Steelworkers District 3 and National Office, United Food and Commercial Workers 1518, Move Up Together, the BC Federation of Labour, the Bargaining Council of BC Building Trades Unions, and Labour's International Union 1611. I want to thank them all for their support to make projects like this possible. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ken. Who can remember here the 1960s? I think many of us can, but I think some of us weren't even around then. Exactly. Our next speaker can definitely remember the 60s. President of the BCTF from 1963 to 1964, Jim Kearney is here today to share his reflections on decades of advocacy and activism. Please welcome Jim.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow speakers, President Glenn particularly, a big shout out to the members of the staff who will remember me. In younger days, I was better looking, and we worked together in the old building on Broadway and 6th Avenue. I remember it fondly, exciting times, and I appreciate your presence here. I'd also like to welcome two handsome young gentlemen who've chosen to come today to their first meeting of teachers to hear what their grandfather would sound like speaking to the group. Birthdays and anniversaries are times for parties and gifts and laughter and storytelling. And I have a story to tell you, a short one. It's about me. Who else? I will try to be humble and brief. I started teaching in September of 1951 in a small community, Lake Cowichan, at the high school. And I attended my first local association meeting that fall, a group of about 40 members. And I was gently railroaded into becoming a member of the Public Relations Committee. I was assured by my nominees that the task would not be onerous, and I just might learn something interesting and possibly even exciting. Actually, their counsel was accurate, for indeed I became interested, so interested that I continued on that committee and others for a number of years, and eventually became the president of the Cowichan Lake Teachers Association. I left the district to take another position, to work with a principal who was a former president, Bernard Gilley from the 40s, who of course got me involved with the Victoria Teachers Association. And I spent some time in committee work and the executive committee, and became the president of that organization. And as a result of that, I became the district council representative to the BC Teachers Federation Executive Committee. And I spent a few years there, and the 1963 annual general meeting opted to elect me to the role of president. Some of you may remember the 1960s faintly, the age of Aquarius, Camelot, funny cigarettes. It was a major period of social upheaval, political, economic, a challenge in the case of education, because the boomer generation had arrived and were to create more change and some considerable havoc in education over a period of 18 years. It was a period of change for the Teachers Federation, a very significant one. We were governed at that time by a structure that had started in the 1920s. It was adequate for that period, but it had become somewhat inefficient, burdensome, and during my year, we established a committee that looked at a new structure. In fact, developed a plan, a series of proposals to change the governing composition of the organization. The proposals, surprisingly enough, were rather quickly and easily developed by the committee. There was a member of that committee present beside myself, Bob Buzza. The difficulty was convincing the membership, and it took 2 years, in fact, before the proposals, amended somewhat, became accepted. That governing structure is basically the one that exists today. Small executive committee, elected provincially, a representative assembly to represent the local associations, and of course, the larger annual general meeting. And it has proved, I gather, with a number of modest amendments, successful to this day. I left office as the past president, went back to teaching, worked for a year with the government as a curriculum consultant, took an administrative job in another school district, and then had an opportunity to apply for a position with the Teachers Federation, 1966. I did so, was appointed. My mother was beginning to worry at the time about the fact that I wasn't very good at holding one job. But I stayed with the Federation for 20 years, worked in both professional development and economic welfare. And after I retired, I formed a two-person consulting firm and spent some time working for and with the BC Teachers Federation on various projects, particularly in the area of pensions. So all in all, I've been involved with this organization for about 46 years. And I go back with very fond memories of my experience and a great deal of personal satisfaction. I've been in every local in the province. I have talked to and argued with and debated with thousands of teachers. Many I've helped. Some I may have hindered inadvertently. But I feel a great deal of satisfaction about my involvement with the organization. And I tell you this story not because I think it's particularly interesting, and it's, to my mind, not particularly strange in that I think variations of my story have been repeated and are presently being acted upon by various elected members throughout the province. That's certainly true of virtually every past president. We've gone through some period of development and remained committed to the aims and objectives of the organization throughout most, if not all, of our professional career. And it's one of the interesting and appealing and most impressive characteristic of the Federation, that it engenders enthusiasm and activism on the part of teachers. Our voluntary participation in this organization from the get-go, 1917, has been one of the strongest means within the organization of pursuing and achieving its goals. Dedicated professional teachers pursuing those objectives that Ken spoke of. And so I come to the end, except for this. I think I can, sorry, the second thing I meant to say was that I believe the story of my experience gives me some credibility, some confidence to advise you of the fact that I believe that most teachers in the province would be very pleased, those who are presently employed and active, and those like myself who are retired, and perhaps even those who are dead, would be pleased to note the fact that you've come to celebrate the 100th anniversary. And they would be, I think, piqued and cheered at the notion that this meeting would result in the placing of a particular plaque on the building to honor their efforts on behalf of the profession and teachers individually and collectively. And while I think about the plaque, I might offer you a habit to adopt. Those of you who come and they'll pass it, Ken, will they be able to touch it? That you might, in entering this building and perhaps in leaving it, you might touch the plaque or nod or wink at it or throw it a kiss and think a kind thought about a teacher that perhaps you had in school, or a teacher who was a working colleague, one who has done you or provided a service, one that has perhaps pointed you in a new direction with respect to your employment or career, one, in a hopeful case, that may have inspired you. And you might bear this in mind about the plaque, that those to whom it honors at the moment feel you have an obligation, that they have participated in this organization to achieve objectives for the profession, for education, for the benefit of individual teachers. And what you possess in those areas are the results of their individual and collective efforts. And so it behooves you to assume the obligation, one that they would expect you to assume, that it is yours to preserve and to protect what they have provided, and it is yours to improve upon what they have provided. I wish you well. I wish the Federation great success in dealing with all the challenges and the opportunities that it faces in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Jim. And as you've heard, we have a deep, deep sense of history here with the BCTF. And for the last 100 years, the BCTF, as you've heard, has been leading the way for teachers and public education in BC. But what about the next 100 years? to share her perspectives as a newer BCTF member and the years still to come, please welcome from Delta, Mahima Lamba.
So we're here to celebrate 100 years of the BCTF, and I'm learning a lot about what's been accomplished, the important work that happens here every day, behind the scenes, the activism, the advocacy of members and staff for better teaching and learning. Of course, something that people have been talking to me a lot about has been the recent victory in the Supreme Court of Canada. I'm sure many of the people who are here today had worked tirelessly. They'd worked do you want me to stand? Okay. They've worked tirelessly for libraries, for learning support teachers, and they've been working tirelessly for smaller classes. That's okay. Should I move? Okay. To those people, I'd like to say thank you for the big win. For a new teacher like me, I don't necessarily understand all the nuances, but I'm excited about the importance of what it could mean for my classroom. And most importantly, I see it as a symbol of hope that has brightened the faces on my colleagues when I see them in the staff room. When they talk about it, they look hopeful. And I understand that hope on maybe a smaller scale because I've been working pretty tirelessly too. I've been working tirelessly on making math centers. I've been working tirelessly on reading interventions. I've been working tirelessly on finding materials for my classroom. I've been giving up some of my evenings, my weekends, the entire last month of August to get my classroom ready. And I'm not really complaining about it. I would do it again. And I know, next year I will do it again. And so will everybody that I work with. Teachers can really give a lot. We're always giving more time, more personal resources, and the sheer magic of making things out of nothing. Every day, my colleagues work towards the best for the children that we love. We always have just an ounce more of patience, just a tiny bit more love, just a little bit more attention we can give. Just when I think I'm about to run out, that I'm fresh out, I somehow find it in me and I come up with even more. Despite all of this, sometimes I get this feeling in me. I look around and it's almost like a mixture of panic and doubt. I look around at my classroom and I want the best for the faces I see smiling at me. And I ask the question, is it enough? And I ask an even bigger question, am I enough? And I wonder, but you can't really get philosophical. Your classroom is a busy place. You can't stop. And in this way, my colleagues, they're the quietest leaders. I look around and the kindergarten girls in my class play this little game. It's pretty simple. It's called Miss Lamba, and the premise is that they all take turns pretending to be me. And the first time I saw it, I thought it was funny. And after a while, it was a little weird, like the mannerisms, things I was doing I didn't know I was doing. And then I started to take it quite seriously that I saw myself in these little girls. So now when I get that feeling, I try and keep a smile on my face. I try and ignore the doubt. I try and hold on to the hope because I know that all the little people are watching me. They're looking at me and I want them to see hope. And I try and think about the small victories and the small wins in my classrooms. Someone's 5th birthday, someone's 6th birthday, someone's lost a tooth, someone who only knew 10 letter sounds at the beginning of the year and knows almost all 26 now. A mom who brings you a scone in the morning on the same day you forget your lunch. A colleague who found a whiteboard and hid it in her classroom for you because she knew you'd want it. Special things like a dad who builds you a bench because he wants your students to have somewhere to sit and change their shoes. A local restaurant that gives you a couple more takeout containers because you want them to store your art supplies. So here's to celebrating all the victories, big and small, the work that's being done and the work that's left to do. I'd just like to challenge everybody to think about what kind of leader you are for you and your colleagues. And I want you to keep going for the people who need you and stay hopeful because I want you to think about who you're going to be when the little people are going to look.
Thank you very much, Mahima, and thank you to all our amazing speakers, and I hope that you were as touched as I was by them. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming and those watching on live stream as well. I would especially like to thank the former presidents that are in the room of the BCTF and executive committee members. I'd also really like to thank the other labor leaders that are here today. We are so happy that you were able to join us. It means a lot. We definitely have a lot to celebrate and be proud of. And please feel free to stay and keep the conversation going. There's lots of food. We can share more stories. And enjoy the evening. And I'd just like to end with congratulating all of us, the BCTF, on 100 amazing years. Thank you for coming.